This is an updated tutorial for Tomodachi Drawer, a tool that helps you draw any image you want in Tomodachi Life without needing a modded Switch or to be playing in an emulator. To do this, you'll need a microcontroller. The recommended choice is an RP2040, which can be found for about $5. The program is also compatible with the RP2350, as well as the Raspberry Pi Pico or Pico 2. In the future, support for the ESP32S3 range of microcontrollers is planned. However, that would only be practical for those that already happen to have one of those. If you are getting a microcontroller for this, I'd recommend the RP2040 or RP2350 as it is much cheaper. You'll also need a USB cable to connect the microcontroller to the Switch as well as your PC. That is capable of data transfer, not just charging. A few notes. Switch 1 and Switch 2 are both supported. However, the Switch 1 is much more prone to desyncing than the Switch 2 due to intermittent lag spikes that can cause inputs to become out of sync. Unfortunately, this is largely unavoidable. However, we are trying to make sense of it. If you are playing on an emulator, you are better off using a save editor to do this than this program. There is functionally no risk to using this. Tomodachi Life is a single-player game with no filters, and similar programs have been made for Splatoon for drawings without any issue for years. First off, you'll need to download the software. The program is available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. Open the link in the description, which will bring you to the GitHub. Navigate to the Releases page and select the version for your device. If you are on a modern Mac with an Apple CPU, you'll want the Mac ARM64 version. If you're on an older Mac with an Intel CPU, you'll want the Mac x64 version. Otherwise, download the appropriate version for your platform. Once you have downloaded it, you must extract the zip folder in its entirety. If you're on a Mac, there are some additional instructions you must follow that are included in the readme.txt file. If you do not follow this, your computer may say that the package is damaged, which is not true. Once you have extracted the zip folder, launch the executable. When you first start the program, you'll be prompted to agree or disagree to basic telemetry. You can read about what this entails in this UI, as well as read the source code for the telemetry reporting, and you can change your mind at any time. This just helps me to better understand how people are using Tomodachi Drawer and helps guide development. This will never upload your images to me. Once you have gotten through the first time prompts, you will need to set up your microcontroller. Depending on the microcontroller you have, this may involve different steps. For the RP2040 or RP2350, you can plug the microcontroller into your computer. Once connected, hold the boot button down and press the reset button while still holding the boot button. A moment or so after tapping the reset button, release the boot button. This will enter what is known as boot mode and is necessary for flashing the firmware as well as writing images to it. For the Raspberry Pi Pico or Pico 2, you instead will hold the boot button down whilst connecting the Pico to your system to enter boot mode. Once in boot mode, you should hopefully see the program recognize that your microcontroller is connected. You'll first need to flash the firmware. This is a one-time operation and writes the code that handles sending the inputs to your Switch. The program will automatically select the tab for your version of microcontroller, at which point you can press the Flash Base Firmware button. Once you have done this, the microcontroller will restart itself and begin flashing yellow and then eventually flash red. This is expected as it has no image data yet. A note, if you're using a Pi Pico or Pico 2, it only has a single green LED, so the indications will differ. You need to put the microcontroller back into boot mode. Do it the same way you did it the first time. Once you've reconnected it to your system, it should detect it again, and at this point, you can begin setting things up in the program. First, select the Switch version you have. This helps to avoid some extra common desyncs, although the Switch one is still prone to them for larger drawings. Once selected, you have two options for how you want to load an image. If you are doing a drawing for a pet, a generic treasure, plain t-shirt, or a Mii's face paint, you can simply drag and drop the image into the window or use the open button to load the image. Your image should be 256 by 256. If it is bigger, it will be resized to fit as this is the size of the canvas in-game. You can also use the template tool. This is for non-rectangular creations such as building exteriors, TVs, DVDs, or various clothing items. If you wish to use this, select the appropriate template and it will bring up this menu. Once in this menu, it will automatically copy the template shown on the right onto your clipboard, which you can then edit in the photo editing software of your choice. A note, due to some issues with Windows scaling and the UI library used by this program, it's possible the image may end up in incorrect size once pasted in your program. It should be 256 by 256 pixels. If it is not, you should use the Save button to save it to a file and instead open that for editing. Once you have the image in your editing software, you can fill in whatever you want in it. The no draw area will be removed by the program when you re-import it, and reflects the area that you were unable to draw in-game. Once you have completed your drawing, you can either copy the completed drawing to your clipboard from your image editing software and paste it in, or load it back up from a file. When you do that, the template tool will cut out the no draw area, and you can hit confirm to return back to the main UI. The following steps are the same for both regular square drawings or ones using the template tool. For demonstration purposes, I will just be using the regular square with an album art. By default, the color mode used is arbitrary. This uses the full color range and up to the number of colors set here to prepare the image for drawing. A higher number of colors will increase the time it takes for it to draw, so you should pick the lowest number that looks to the quality you desire. You can also choose from the other three options for color matching if you want to use the existing in-game palette, but for most cases, you'll want to use arbitrary. The practical limit is probably around 100, although you can go up to 256. For Switch 1 users, the higher the number you select, the more likely you are to encounter a desync. There is also an option here to auto home to top left. This is enabled by default for full-size 256 by 256 images and means that the program will position the top left pixel of your image at the top left of the canvas. If your image is not 256 by 256, the drawing will be drawn in-game with the top left of the image being drawn where the cursor is before you connect the microcontroller. Once you've selected your preferred settings and you have your microcontroller connected, you can begin the export process. Additionally, depending on the complexity of your image, you may want to increase the TSP solve time. You can find more information about what this means by clicking the question mark button. Once you have that all settled, click the Export to RP2040 or RP2350 button, depending on the microcontroller you have. This will begin to calculate the optimal route for drawing in-game, and you can see the progress in the log window here. This will take longer if you have more colors or if you have raised the TSP time limit. Once it is completed, it will automatically flash it to your microcontroller. Unplug it from your computer and head over to your Switch. There is a bit of setup that must be done initially for this to work. On your Switch, head to the System Settings, then go to Controllers and Accessories and enable Pro-Controllered Wire Communication. If you do not enable this, the Switch will simply ignore the microcontroller and no inputs will be received. Then, go back to Tomodachi Life. In-game, proceed to the palette house, select the type of drawing you want, and once in the drawing screen, ensure that you are in Pro mode. If your image is smaller than 256 by 256, set the cursor to the top left of where you want it drawn. Otherwise, just leave the cursor anywhere in the canvas. Ensure that you are not in the Connect controller screen when starting a drawing and connect your microcontroller to the USB port on your Switch, whether that be the dock or directly on the USB-C port. For longer drawings, I would recommend you use the dock. Once connected, it will begin to draw. The estimate shown in the program when you export is very accurate for reference. If you are on the Switch 1, you may want to occasionally check in on it to ensure that it hasn't desynced. Once the image is done drawing, the microcontroller's LED will go to a rainbow or solid green depending on the version you have, at which point you can disconnect it from your Switch. You can then reconnect to your PC while holding the boot button and reflash your next image for it to draw. If you have any questions or encounter any issues, you can either leave a comment or open an issue on the GitHub.